Good afternoon. I have prepared something so that I'll just be reading this afternoon. So I entitled my short paper, I think short, as Joblessness in Literature. So our topic, what are we doing and thinking? This was the question assigned to us here. And when the same question was anchored as to how I see myself in relation to Jose Rizal and the nation, I had this assumption. I think the very germ of what we are currently doing and thinking is we are escaping. Through literature, we escape to possibilities, we find respite or entertainment. Basically, we become escapers as practicing writers. And this is where I think the problem lies. We've escaped too much, too regularly, that we have distanced ourselves too far from reality. What made Jose Rizal a force to reckon with was his ways of unmasking the troubles of this country. He reminded through two novels about corruption of the government, the unjust treatment of the society, and a lot of other abuses. In other words, Jose Rizal showed truth, or rather what was true and staring in his time. So right now, what truth could we show as young contemporary writers? What could be our primary concern? Well, here is one truth that seems to be very palpable today. Job and the absence of it, not only in reality but also in fiction. Hundreds of stories have been spun about love and other feelings. There are also abundant stories about trips to outer space, as what his profession wants to be a sci-fi. And even the occasional rubbing of elbows with creatures of horror has its fair share in the literary scene, especially with the popularity of the so-called speculative fiction, which is like the umbrella term for sci-fi, fantasy, right? And as far as but when it comes to human labor and its nature, it is somewhat absent in literature right now, especially in short fiction. As far as I can remember in local literature, we have the secretary, Miss Mijares, in Kerima Polutan Tovera's The Virgin. We have the real estate agent Divina in Rosario Cruz Lucero's Good Husbands and Obedient Wives. There's also the group of people who cope with getting fired in Ian Rosales Casocot's Yeah Baby, Take It All In Bitch. And as for foreign stories, we have the diagnosis analyst in Jumpa Lahiris, the interpreter of maladies. And there's also the baker in Raymond Carver's A Small Good Thing. So on the surface, this may seem just another set of stories about relationships. But here, the characters' jobs are crucial, figuring not only as cosmetic devices, but also triggers of emotions, of psyches, and of the general environment of the story. Today, as a literary subject, work or daily labor is merely receives the wallpaper treatment. A job is often thrown in as just another detail, an extra, something as minor as the main character's smooth skin or brand of shoes. Whether the work is done behind a computer, behind the wheel, behind the sink, or behind the chopping board, or behind the planggana, it seems underrepresented, if not entirely missing. This is not much of an argument, but merely an observation. One would probably argue that life itself is work, but that is of course another story. What I'm trying to bring up here is the very means of acquiring money for the food on our plates. And then, actually, a good chunk of the workforce in the Philippines is made up of young professionals, especially in the BPO industry, with our call centers, and with the class of 2012 graduating soon, for graduating year students. Now, no one? So yeah, with the class of 2012 graduating soon, again, jobs and work would be at the center of people's lives. As for the young practicing writers, I guess we ought to be aware of this. The essayist Alain de Botton said that people rely on writers to help explain the world to them. So the question is, have our writers explained the world of the daily toil sufficiently? Should there be a need to explain it? And why don't we just leave both the working class struggle and the high society's eternal discontent to men behind journalism? After all, our newspaper earned enough, diba? Given its very subjective nature, it is no wonder work as a literary subject tends to be sidelined as an accessory. But the answers to the questions mentioned earlier would all boil down to this fact. We are in hard times, affected in one way or another. The overall weakening state of the world economy alone paints a picture that we are linked by consequences. And it is strange a strong theme such as this is ignored in fiction. But why is it ignored? Young contemporary writers have reasons, of course. It could be plainly boring. It could be too distancing from pop culture, MTV, It could be actually anything. But the novelist and journalist John Lancaster has a detailed idea in his article, Why Fiction Breaks Down. He said that although fiction can be fantastical, wild, incoherent, even mad, it has to feel true. It has to generate a world and create a satisfying order within that world. But there are limits, and one of them is to do with unlikeliness. He said that fiction copes badly with unlikeliness. The bizarre is fine, but sheer unlikeliness, improbability, things that simply shouldn't have happened or feel as if they couldn't have happened, even after you know they have happened, is likely to break a fictional world. And because of this unlikeliness, along with his deduction that modern work, specifically modern work, is so complicated, you can't thoroughly explain in fiction the complex realities of different working lives, a story about work tends to collapse. This is, of course, just another reason, and which, if tweaked a little further, could be another excuse. With this year's Philippine Arts Festival theme, Tradisyon at Inobasyon, I think the concept of the daily toil could be as relevant as ever. With tradition, we could acknowledge again the fundamental hard-working Filipino. And with innovation, we could acknowledge the developments of how work shapes us and how we shape work. We could both face the past and the present. It is not that stories about love or manananggal aren't enjoyable, of course. It is not that there are no recognizable truths in those stories either. I simply think the time calls for it to resurrect and highlight the real face of labor, warts and all, in literature. Work may be a tedious matter, even daunting, especially in times right now, others don't even have a job. But it will always be a part of the human condition and the human experience. And with literature, we could grapple it down, tame it. This is the strength of the written word. I guess Wisława Szymborska, the Polish poet who died last February, early this February, says it best with her poem, The Joy of Writing. Writing, she said, to quote the last two lines of the poem, is the power of preserving, revenge of the mortal hand. Thank you.